All right, welcome back to the program. As we await the Senate confirmation of a new power minister, that is Joseph Olasukomi Tegbe. The bigger question is not the appointment, but whether this appointment marks a shift from political rotation to technical leadership in one of Nigeria's most critical sectors, the power sector. So perhaps the power sector is not even short of ideas at this time, or perhaps it's about execution. Joining me now to break this all down is George Etomi, Director at West Power and Gas. Mr. Etomi, good morning and thank you for joining us this morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good morning, Nancy. Always nice to talk to you.
Yes, always good to have you, and thank you for joining us all the way from the U.S. I know I've interrupted your sleep, so thank you. We appreciate that. Let me start here with the nomination of Joseph Tegbe. We await his confirmation. Is this a moment for reset or just another leadership change in a system that has struggled to deliver?
Well, I'm trying, Nancy, to move away from expressing overly optimistic or pessimistic views about appointments. But I would say that this is the first time that we're having somebody with some modicum of expertise in the sector now being called to give its policy direction. It's early days yet, but for the government itself to recognize that perhaps it's time to shift away from getting politicians essentially run the energy sector. I think it's a welcome development, but the challenges ahead will determine whether or not this has been a good choice. But clearly, where we stand today, the work for the minister-elect is cut out, and I think he needs not be educated about what the pain points are in the industry. Now, if he gets the necessary political backing, I believe he can go and begin to deal with them systematically. But having said that, he is only there for the policy end of it. The execution is still going to be left in the hands of regulators. It's still going to be directed in terms of what the Electricity Act expects states to do. So states' participation in also unlocking potential is vital. And so how the states themselves set up their regulatory agencies is also very critical. And then we will then begin to look at the structural hiccups in the system. Gas to power was never in the equation. We produced our gas for export, but now we must begin to see how we can look at the infrastructure that will allow gas to be taken inwards for power. Because once we do that, we would have unlocked one of the major pain points in the industry. In other words, once you get a supply of gas going, then your thermal plants, which provide you 80% of your power source today, will be in a position to work optimally. Even in this difficult market, we still have an installed generating capacity of 15,000 megawatts, as you mentioned. But evacuating it is the elephant in the room. So what they will do with regard to the transmission company is key. GAMCO is in place. Again, we want to see how GAMCO can attract investment, because it's all about creating an atmosphere that will bring in investment. Government itself, I don't think is in a position to fund, because whenever government gets into the funding end of it, we go into the debacle of subsidy. We want to run away from that. So we need to unlock the transmission difficulties, and then it takes us to the distribution end. Most of our distribution networks are old, need to be modernized. That has already been privatized in a manner of speaking. Now, how states can get power that they can embed into the disco networks that serve them will be another major thing to do. But bottom line to everything that I'm talking about is funding. The amount of money required to fund the power sector is humongous. It runs into several billions of dollars, and it's got to be a sustained one. And then, of course, we also now need to look at consumer confidence. You talk about a trust deficit. The metering gap still needs to be closed and ultimately eliminated. It should not be a pain point that people are struggling to understand why they are not clear about what they need to pay based on consumption that they get. So that metering gap needs to be closed. It is metering that creates trust between consumers and the distribution companies. And then, of course, you also need to look at consumer habits as well. Power theft is a chronic problem, and that's because the origins of the power in Nigeria was that it was provided as a social service. So getting people to change habits and not take this power because it is for them is also going to be one of the major challenges. So it's Hydra-headed, but it's achievable.
Mr. Etomi, you said quite a lot. Let me try and distill each that you have said. I hope I'll keep up with you. God help me. Because even this sector is so complex. You know, how many we will talk? Let me just turn to pidgin. You know, how many will talk for the sector? But I want to get your stance as to the sector's leadership in the last many years. Do you think that we've had a leadership problem? Or more of like an execution capacity problem? Because that is also tied to leadership. Because if you don't also have good leaders, they won't know what to execute. But what exactly is it in 15 seconds? Then I take you on some of the things that you've talked about.
Yeah, clearly, I think immediately after privatization, the minister that came in was Governor Fashola. Even though his appointment was based on his political leanings at the time, he came in with a degree of knowledge of the sector in terms of trying to grapple with what the key issues were. But those early days were tough because he had to deal with a sector that had just been privatized. And so getting habits to change from those in the ministry that he controlled to those new entrants into the market was not easy. I remember he held monthly stakeholders meeting where attempts were made to map out how these challenges would be met. But unfortunately that he was also saddled on, remember, with two other major ministries, works and housing. So how much can one man do? So he did the best he could and had to leave. And then subsequent appointments have always had political coloration, and that's always the problem, because once you have politicians there, the attention span is very, very short. And what we've seen, even in the case of some past ministers who have been prosecuted, they are caught with their hands in a cookie jar. And like I told you, because power is so political, it tends to be one place that many people like to be posted to, because they feel they could use it to either endear themselves to the electorate, but as we've seen, it's becoming the graveyard of politicians.
In Nigeria, it's not like that.
Yes,
Nigeria, exactly. That role of a prime minister is hard.
So, yeah, exactly. And so when the ministers are then forced to give timelines, because that's where the problem comes in, because they're ministers, they must make promises and they must allow timelines. So you hear them giving, they're not technical people, but they will tell you, in 6 months it will be unlocked, in 1 year this will be done, in 3 months, and these times have come and gone and nothing has happened. In fact, the situation has become worse, and that's always a problem, when you have too much politics, more politics than technical ability playing in these appointments.
Okay.
It is against that background that we're hoping that the new minister designate will do less of politicking and just go straight to what the pain points are and begin to assemble capable people to deal with it. He has to interact with the regulators at all levels. He has to deal with the political end of things. I hope they let him work. That's so important. And baseline, he's able to create the enabling environment for investments coming.
If you take a look at the timeline, pending when the Senate approves his nomination, we have about a year now to the next dispensation. President Tinubu will be, his tenure will be expiring May 29th, 2027. So just like a year from now. So the new minister designates, when he comes in, I'm sure he has less than a year. Just opposite to the promise of Mr. President while he was campaigning, that if there's no power, they shouldn't vote him again. So do you think that the timeline they have, now they will be able to fulfill that promise? What has not been done in 20-something years will now be done in 1 year.
Yeah. You see, this is what I was saying about the way politicians view the sector as opposed to the way the technical people view it. If you ask any technical person to say, when will we have 24/7 electricity in Nigeria, they will be very circumspect to put a timeline on it because of all the interplay amongst the various sectors that I just mentioned playing out, from gas availability to infrastructural issues to transmission, all these things that I mentioned. A technical person will be very circumspect because each one of them has a life cycle of its own. But for politicians, it's all about votes, it's all about promises, and so against better judgment, they stick out their necks. I remember, I think it was Minister Bola Ige who,
Yes.
during the time, who first mentioned 6 months.
6 months,
Now,
yeah.
how did he arrive at 6 months? Even Governor Fashola, I think, also talked about some sort of timeline. So it's a problem. And so I wasn't surprised that Mr. President, it was even unscripted, gave that promise of I'll give you constant electricity. The issues are very complex. They can be unlocked, but they are very complex. So 1 year, to answer your question, isn't going to be enough, but 1 year is enough time to set us back on the right path. And we will know when we are on the right path. So there's still work to be done, but I would ask that we avoid making unrealistic promises.
Let's take a look at some of the issues that you brought up earlier, because you talked about a lot. The gas to power economics, you alluded to it a bit, the liquidity crisis and all of that, transmission. So I'm trying to see where I would even start from. Let's take a look at the liquidity issue. If Genco invoices are around 3 trillion or perhaps even more than that, I don't know how much they are now, because our friend, our mutual friend, Dr. Ogaji Joy will have better understanding of that. If there are trillions of naira and collections are below 40%, that's they're collecting, their invoices are below 40%. What would you say about the cash flow deficit? How much of that deficit is perhaps attributable to tariff on the recovery, government subsidy arrears, disco collection failure, and how can this be solved? Because we've even seen her a lot of times talk about these issues. I think there's a 501 billion naira somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, intervention. You know, these issues are too technical and they are too fast-paced. How many will you go follow at the same time? But let's try and analyze it, you know.
Well, I've always mentioned to you, Nancy, that the primary problem in the sector is it's one of liquidity, and it presents as a liquidity crisis because of all the other things we've mentioned. For example, lack of cost-reflective tariffs finds its roots in the origins of power. Power was never provided in the days of yore for government to make money. So when consumption, population, and everything grew, and it became more and more daunting, they realized they needed to create some commercial coating around it. Hence the change from what was then ECN to was it NEPA to PHCN. It was to make create a structure that would bend to commercial propositions. But it's like, but having the same people who are used to running it like a social venture wasn't just going to cut it. So ultimately the decision was taken to privatize it. And upon privatization, the government realized that they had to create the atmosphere for that to work, for the incentives to work. One of the promises was made was we will allow for cost-reflective tariffs, because as we've discussed, what people pay for power isn't what it costs the power to be produced. They were going to give clean balance sheets to the successor companies, the investors. That never happened. So perennially, it was a problem. Their books were so bad, they were not bankable. And as we can see, 6 discos fell to their banks. We've seen that already. Then there was the issue of metering and all that, the gap, and we've seen all the various metering propositions. We've seen we've seen MAF, we've seen all sorts of the metering initiative, all because they're all tied to liquidity. The discos were expected to meet the customer, but it takes amounts to that, and for whose tariff those difficulties. Then we tell back to the gas. Why do we have all these debts to the Gencos? The government essentially just promise will provide you, as I told you, will give you 5,000 megawatts. Gas was a major issue. Now the Gencos have to pay the gas suppliers. And as I mentioned about the gas supply infrastructure not being there, many of these gas producers didn't have the incentive to produce and give power to the grid. For example, Egbe power station had about 6 turbines. 4 are contracted to the grid. And you have so many others like that. And they were producing power, but never being paid for the cost. And so over time, this built, and because the government itself was struggling with liquidity, they were not paying these debts as and when they were due. Okay. And of course, it all then got caught in a reconciliation. And don't forget, these are moving debts, because for as long as electricity is produced and consumed, more of these debts pile up. So when you hear we have provided 500 billion to clear debts to Gencos, another time 801 billion. We've had now we're looking at 3.3 trillion. It still is a moving target. As we speak, it is still building up.
Okay, and Mr. Etomi, sorry, let me now bring in this question. Is NBETS, which is a bulk trading company that was established in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, is NBETS still fit for purpose as that credit buffer with all of this? Because I want to assume what the power minister designates. I'm sure he will be even looking at a lot of things now, even before he goes to the Senate for confirmation. So is it still fit for purpose? Is it still functional? It has become a bottleneck. You know, NBETS just also reminded me of AMCON. AMCON in the banking.
Yeah, absolutely correct.
You understand?
Absolutely correct.
Yes. If there's even still a need, yes.
It's a worthy analogy. NBET was never designed to stay forever. It was just a stopgap measure.
Are you sure both companies were not even set up the same year, if I'm not mistaken? NBET 2010.
And I'm gone.
Yes.
And I'm gone. Yeah, but
Yes.
but in a sense, AMCON has stabilized the banking sector. In other words, it took off the most push from those failing banks and allowed the banks to continue their operation whilst they were clearing up the debts and all that. AMCON's lifetime was extended,
yes,
because its job was not complete. But essentially, it worked for the banking sector. But for the power sector, NBET, don't forget, was the go-between between GENCOs and DISCOs. So through power purchase agreements, they entered into agreements with the GENCOs, essentially promising to pay for power. And NBET was the entity that was meant to be funded by the government to make GENCOs whole. And then through vesting contracts, they gave this contract to DISCOs, who were expected to then collect revenues from consumers and pay to NBET. And of course, because these revenues coming in were, one, not cost reflective, secondly, had a lot of ATC&C losses, the money was never enough. So NBET was just caught in an uncomfortable middle where they were owing GENCOs and the DISCOs were not giving enough money. I mean, you can justify them any which way, but that was the reality of the situation. Now, has NBET outlived its usefulness? In a manner of speaking, yes, because with the Electricity Act and states now coming into play, what is now expected is that each state will now do what they need to do, find a way of embedding power directly into their systems, also find a way of ensuring they make their collections, because that is very key. Otherwise, states can run into the quagmire where they find that they suddenly have to be funding electricity consumption in their states, especially given its heavy political connotation. And if they do that, it will bankrupt many states themselves. So they have to be very careful how they manage this new scenario where they are becoming major players in the sector. So to be direct with the question, NBET, it should be on its way out. There's not much for it to do, and then we're just hoping that we can continue to do those things that will attract investment. But I want to mention something. Gas to power. I talked about the gas to power infrastructure. You know, they recently completed the OB3, the Obiafu, Obricom, Oben pipeline. So, you know, they have done the AKK, the Ajakuta one, that was taking gas from the gas belts up to Ajakuta and Kaduna. Now, this OB3 is meant to unlock gas in far-flung fields in the Niger Delta and bring them in country, from rivers to Edo to various of these states. Now, people may not understand the significance of this. It's a huge development, because if that will guarantee gas supply inward, in other words, it will solve one of the major issues I raised, which is the gas to power infrastructure deficit. This will do it, and it's so welcome that I think the new minister has his work cut out. They can now begin to see how this can then feed into how the GENCOs get their power, and we don't have this issue of competition between gas that's meant for export and gas that's meant for power.
Okay, Mr. Etomi, even as we close, because we have about 3-4 minutes to the end of the program, it's nice that you brought me to that gas to power economics, so you've looked at it. But if you had to choose one lever for this minister to focus on that will rapidly improve the electricity supply, let me put it this way, not just sector. Let's not take a look at sector. Let's get a bit real here. To rapidly improve electricity supply within the next 9 to 10 months, because this administration is on its way out. Would it be, yes, would it be, let me give you options. Would it be gas supply reforms, just like you've talked about? Will it be perhaps a recapitalization of the discos? Or would it also be transmission expansion? Or whatever you think it will be that I haven't mentioned, and why, in just 1 minute.
Okay. It's difficult to say one because they're all interconnected problems.
So
they're all linked
problem.
to the chain. And yes, and everybody is as strong as the weakest link. That's my problem. But I would say that they should concentrate on how at least the existing 15,000 megawatts can be evacuated. That's so important. Strengthen the transmission lines and then put pressure on the discos to modernize the network so that when this power finally is evacuated, it is not then wasted in commercial and collection losses.
Okay. Mr. Etomi, how about the issue of data? Are you guys all okay in that sector in terms of the issue of data? I'm talking about real-time data in that sector. Publicly accessible central power market data that is on the platform of accountability. Because even for GENCOs, for example, the amount that Madam Joy is quoting, some people in the corridors of power saying that's just frivolous. There's not. So that brings me to the issue of data. You understand? So yeah, I don't know if it's something that's a challenge or I'm just thinking aloud.
Yes, as I told you, how do you deal with data issues? The data requires different from different sectors. Say, for example, on the consumption, the distribution end of it, most of your data will have to do with ensuring that you have a robust metering network, because with that, it is easy to track power that goes there. On the generation side, ideally, with modern equipment like things like SCADA, the regulator just insisting on how do I put it, bringing most of the power that's supplied onto a data network. It is then easy. The problem you are mentioning with Joy is more of reconciliation, and that's because, as I told you, these debts are not stagnant. As you pay, more debts accumulate. And quite naturally, we know subsidies everywhere, petroleum, gas, they are generally abused. So you will not be surprised when you get a pushback. But the truth is that it's a moving target. So if you settle one, for as long as electricity is produced, that is also building up. So if you then you don't look at it in that fashion, then you may then be stuck and say, no, this is what I owe, and put a line underneath it. It may not cut it, but at some point I think we all should get to that point where we have this linkage from gas through to last metering to ensure that we have harmony in the sector.
Mr. Etomi, I don't know if I'll be taking you out of your forte. I wanted to get your views on the news. I don't know if you've seen it, the NNPC Limited signing with Chinese partners over Port Harcourt and Warri refineries. What do you think in 30 seconds? Is that a way to go?
It's a good, yes, it's a way to go. I mean, those assets are too huge. Somebody said they will never work again, it should scrap them, but they are there. If the Chinese can turn them around in a very workable commercial arrangements, fine, because the more of our crude oil we refine, the better for us, because we make more money as a country if we actually export refined products. Because if you add the capacity that will come to what the Dangote refinery is doing, net will have more refined products for export. That means we'll get more money out of that value chain than we are currently doing, merely selling crude oil. So it's a good development.
All right.
I just pray it works.
That's the prayer. And a very big prayer. I just pray it works.
The big one.
Mr. Etomi, thank you very much for speaking with us today again. I hope to speak with you soon. So, thank you.
My pleasure, but don't wake me about 5 a.m.
Yes. But I know that anytime I call upon you that you will answer. Thank you for honoring us always. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. I've been speaking with George Etomi, who is the director at West Power and Gas. And if there's one thing that is clear about the conversation of all what we've been saying, it is that Nigeria's power sector does not lack solutions. Perhaps it's about disciplined executions. What Nigerians really want to see, perhaps the new minister, when he's been approved by the Senate, it should not be just policy design. It should be about the losses reduced. It should be about the number of megawatts that is delivered. It should also be about trust from us as Nigerians. That is the bottom line. And Mr. President said that if we don't give him power, or if he doesn't give us power, we shouldn't vote him again. I hope that Nigerians are taking note of all this, because he made an economic promise. That was an economic promise during the campaigns. And I hope that the economy will be on the front burner when the campaign starts and when the elections are here. Is the economy stupid? I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be. Be the change that you want to see. Have a fantastic day. Bye for now. Thank you for making it up to this minute watching the video. Thank you all. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Moneyline with Nancy TV. Like, follow all our other social media platforms where we keep you up to speed with fantastic interviews, as well as markets, personal finance, business, and economy information. This is the best place to be. I'll see you all again in the next video.